I'd like to take this opportunity at the start of the meeting to thank the contribution of Deborah Collins, who was on this committee since the last election. Unfortunately, she had to resign from the council through ill health, and she made a very positive, valuable contribution to our discussions and our work. So I'd like to go on record in the public domain to thank her for the work she did. Can somebody tell me about the emergency evacuation procedure?
When the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. The designated exits are signposted. Arrangements are in place for the safe evacuation of disabled people.
Thank you, Michaela. So we move on to apologies for absence and substitutions. We haven't had, I don't think. We have? Go on.
Apologies from Councillor Grant Johnson.
Okay, one apology. We also have a substitution. Thank you, Ruth, for substituting for Deborah, I suppose. You're very welcome. Declarations of interest, item 4. We are talking about the local plan, and that I think probably has everybody's interest, but we will assume, for the purposes of this discussion, that you may speak about anything to do with it. Item 5, I have no urgent business, so we can move on to item 6, which is public and councillor statements. We have a member of the public, Terrace, nice to see you, and she is going to talk to us for 3 minutes on embedding sustainability into policy making, especially on transport and flood risk management. Okay, so you have 3 minutes. There will be a clock, I think, on the big screens.
I'll just time it.
Oh, okay. So as soon as you speak, we will start.
Thank you. Today you've got items on local plan movement strategy and climate and nature progress report, so sustainability is central. I spoke at your March meeting on flood awareness and emergency planning. Though not minuted, in reply to a question, I noted that Baines' flood risk management strategy runs from 2015 to 2025, so it expires in 2 months. This is a statutory requirement under the Flood and Water Management Act, so I'm surprised to have seen no reference to a new one yet. 2015 is a long time ago in thinking on climate change, flood risk and climate adaptation. Today's climate and nature report refers often to climate adaptation, almost only with reference to energy. When it refers to flooding, the report speaks largely about nature-based solutions, but these would have small-scale impact and no immediate relevance to areas at risk from flooding now. Where's the plan for areas at significant risk of flooding that need adaptation now? Why does this matter? We've a 10-year-old policy requiring openness, raising awareness and community emergency planning. Yet at the same time, as an unparished community at risk, we've had to fight for key information on flood risk and planning in our area. We've been excluded from knowing how our own evacuation will be impacted by a mass evacuation from a large new venue on our doorstep, whilst an uncorrected flood risk assessment for it consistently understates flood incidents in the last 25 years, including routes that are not just access to the venue, but routes kids walk to school, students walk at night to accommodation, and many more. So how can we plan properly? Flood risk and emergency planning needs to be given much more weight than it is in the report and the wider policies it's supposed to support. Turning to sustainable transport, there are many points of concern in the movement strategy, but I'll stick to one. The strategy is limited to Bath, or rather in reality to residents who live in Bath. A few examples. The strategy says on business travel plans, by working closely with businesses, we have the opportunity to reduce car dependency for commuting and business journeys. This isn't new, but it's not working. Baines recently indicated acceptability of a major venue travel plan that fails Baines transport policies in numerous ways. One of the city's unis has just consulted on a draft travel plan that's opposed in key respects to university access proposals in Baines's movement strategy consultation and falls way short of what one would expect based on the transport SPD. How is it possible that we have a new NHS orthopaedic centre of excellence with no bus route passing it and buses from areas the centre serves 5 to 15 minutes walk away for fit individuals? And yet again, there's little aspiration in the movement strategy to drive up use of existing park and ride sites by the numerous drivers who drive right past these sites into central Bath. Bain's net zero targets on transport are not capable of being met by a relatively small cohort of people with some of the lowest car ownership levels in Baines. If we want to achieve the targets we need policies strong enough to apply to all, not just the easy targets. Thank you.
Thank you on the excellence of your timing. You've obviously practiced that, I suspect. Thank you also for identifying the fact that our flood risk strategy is coming to an end. And also, I'm sure you know this, but the buses are organised by WECA these days rather than Baines. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay. Can I... John?
I was just going to ask whether we could get your remarks circulated, so particularly to me around the movement strategy.
Yes.
Yeah, lovely.
Okay, thank you. I've just been reminded that in March we had Simon Hunter from BART come to talk to us about rivers. So we are working towards a new policy. And the lady behind you, I'm not going to ask her to comment unless she wants to. This is the Cabinet member responsible for both rivers and transport, but possibly if you email Sarah and copy your documents to her, I think that would be very helpful. Okay? Right. Thank you for your time. We move on to the minutes of the meetings on the 3rd of July and the 29th of July. I suppose we have to ask somebody to approve these minutes, do we? Is that normal? So would somebody like to approve? Thank you, John. Seconded. Anyone going to second it? Alex, you were there? Yeah. Okay. So those in favour, please raise their hand. Right, thank you. We move on then to Cabinet member update. We are absorbing into the 3 sessions that we're having. So basically, if we have time at the end of each of these sessions, we will ask if there are any Cabinet member updates. My own view is that we will not get to that glorious position. So we can now move on to the first of the 3 substantive items, which is on the local plan. So,
Chair, may I make just a quick... I'd like to move that item 9 and item 10 be deferred to a later meeting once they've gone through the consultation period and they be brought back to this committee.
do you have a seconder for this move? Okay. Okay. I've been advised that you can make the movement, and if it is successful, which it may not be, that means we will change the next agenda and put it into that, hopefully, which would still be within the scope of the plan. So anyway, you've moved and somebody seconded it, so we need a vote. Yes, Saskia seconded, yeah. Okay. Well, I've been advised that we haven't actually reached the item that you're talking about, Karen, so we will carry on with the item, and then at the end of that time, if it is the will of this committee, we will then have that vote to see if we carry on with that item beyond that and remove the other two items, which I have severe reservations about because people have come here ready to accept that. So that is my ruling, so we'll go to Matt for certainly at least the next 40 minutes. Yeah?
Sorry, I'm going back one to the minutes. I was just wondering, did you, I wasn't at either of those meetings, but did you approve them as two separate things, or are you putting them together? Yeah? Was that's acceptable, is it? Okay, sorry, thanks. Just...
Matt?
Chair.
Yeah.
May I just clarify which two items does the motion relate to?
I think it relates to the other two substantive items, is
There's
my
item
understanding.
9 and item 10.
Which are which?
One is the reset the local plan options document, which is out for consultation, and item 10 is the movement strategy, which is also out for consultation.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Matt, when you're ready.
Which item, sorry, which item is this on the agenda?
The local plan, item 9.
Item 9. Okay. Right. Well, the local plan options consultation is out for consultation as we speak. I thought it might. I do have a presentation, but I thought I might just run through why a local plan. The local plan gives us the opportunity to plan for growth. The government also takes it as an opportunity to set our housing targets, but it's an opportunity for us to update our planning policies as well. We reset the local plan following the government's doubling of our housing target last year, and we did another call for sites and started the process again. The options document that's currently out for consultation, you'll see that there are sort of 4 large sites which have particularly come from us as the council. We want to test those, but our thinking was we want to develop at a quantum that delivers sufficient SIL and Section 106 benefits for the existing communities, so that the existing communities actually get something back from the housing. But all the other sites you'll see in the options document are from the private sector via the HELA process. So they've all come forward from developers, and we now need to test all the sites that have come forward, and we test them against local knowledge. And that's the importance of this consultation, is to go out and get that local knowledge about the sites, because we want to ensure that the sites we've got are sustainable. They're based, this iteration of the options document and the sites within it, there's some key pieces of evidence that have informed that, such as the Department of Transport's connectivity calculator, and you'll see the various sites that have been put forward have a letter, A being well connected, F being poorly connected, so you'll be able to see how that's calculated. It's quite a new calculator, it's a bit loose, a bit generous, but it's there. But again, local knowledge may be very different to the government's, the department's position on connectivity. The other one, of course, is WECA's growth strategy, which we haven't really had this before, a regional input into our local plan, but the regional input is saying that the A4 corridor between Bristol and Bath and the Soma Valley are regionally significant sites for growth. So that's something we've not had before. My expectation is that that means that money will come forward via WECA for infrastructure. And that's important because I think the large site we've put forward above Midsummer Norton really can't come forward at all without that infrastructure investment going first, because there's nothing to connect to at that site. So it's out for consultation. We've taken a new approach to how we do the consultation. You'll see there's the van with the plan. It's a bright orange van that's getting around as many people as possible, but we're also working in partnership with some of our other players in the sort of the housing ecosystem, such as Curo, who began a housing assembly, which is also out and about, and again talking to people, specifically people who need housing, who we don't often hear from. We're very good at engaging with people who already have houses and who don't need any more housing, but we wanted to hear from people who have a need And we are particularly hearing from young people and old people who are saying, old people particularly want to downsize but stay in their communities. Young people want to stay in their communities and have their families in their communities, and just saying there is no housing. I also have 6,000 people on the housing waiting list, so any houses we can build that really are truly affordable and at social rental that the council can hang on to as social rental units are going to really help to tackle that. But of course, as with everybody else, we are market-led, and the market needs its housing at profit in order to subsidise affordable. I wish there was another way. We will work very closely with Homes England, but what we really need is to start to deliver against our overwhelming need, particularly on affordable, because that's what local people are starting to tell us as part of the process so far. So is that all right, Chair? The only other things I just remembered, it's also the chance for us to update some of our policies as well. And we've been at the cutting edge of local authorities in terms of the climate emergency, and we want to stay there. And so we're looking to introduce some new policies, but also update some existing climate policies. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I would recommend that this is a policy and a strategic document. So talking about individual sites is this is probably not the place to do that. I mean, the whole point of the consultation is that you can talk about individual sites on that consultation. So bearing that in mind, I will do what I always do, which is ask one question each from any cabinet member that wants, any scrutiny panel member that wants to ask a question. So do I have any questions? Which anyone? John?
Thank you, Chair. It's most welcome to see at a national level a much greater focus on affordable housing, and by that I really like to focus on what, properly affordable housing, not just so-called affordable housing, but housing that is actually affordable by, the essential workers who keep this place running. And so 6,000 people on the housing list. We have a very severe problem in this community within Bath of providing affordable housing. And we need to have an ambitious plan that doesn't talk just about building 10 or maybe 100 social houses and affordable houses, but talks about building thousands of them. And as you said in your final comment, we are bound by the fact that housing is delivered as a private, by private companies, profit-making companies. I mean, do we feel that this reset properly acknowledges the magnitude of the need for social housing and affordable housing? Do we feel it actually contains the levers that can deliver that, given that ultimately houses are built by for-profit organisations on the large scale?
Yes, I mean, thank you, Councillor Leach. That's a very good point. Clearly, if you've got a market-driven system, the more houses you build, the more affordable you end up with, and the more social rental you end up with. But is that really sufficient to deal with our problem? I think what we're also doing outside of the local plan itself, in terms of a more collaborative approach with our partners, is more likely to deliver for essential workers, key workers, essential workers, and also deliver the social units that we need. But 27,000 houses, I'm not sure what proportion that shakes down at. Our policy is 1/3 affordable, and then the affordable quotient then breaks down into sort of 80% market value, which is the controversial bit, because if the average house price in Bath is 420,000, then 380,000 is not exactly affordable, is it? But by the time you get down to 60% or 50% of market rental, which is where you want to be with social, then you start to have options. And so the council's thrust has been to grow the work it does through AQUIS and ramp up that work. because that's where we can really suck in Homes England money. But also, I think really important is the Housing Mission Delivery Board, which is where we're working in partnership with some of the other big landowners in Bath, where we can actually say, look, we're all going to be developing plots of land over the next 20 years as part of this local plan process. Can we work more collaboratively together and offer up some land that is purpose-driven, not profit-driven? So what does purpose-driven mean? Purpose-driven means we're creating housing that people need at an affordable price, and particularly key worker. So I think we will use the local plan to update our policies, but I think the Housing Mission Delivery Board and the Housing Accord that most of the political parties have signed up to is the way forward for urgently delivering, I think, the key worker and social units that we need to because I have 6,000 people on the housing waiting list, 500 of whom at any one time are in crisis. And the current situation has been that we're building maybe 10 purely social units a year, and we've got to ramp that up. It doesn't touch the problem. And I get written to when somebody is offered a house in Bristol, where their family and their school and their support system is all in Bath, and they get offered a place in Bristol. So and that's all there is. But we work closely with Bristol to provide that housing. So I think to be able to increase the council's housing stock, and we do have a manifesto commitment to push that towards 1,000 by 2033. That is really key. But I think what the local plan does is help to facilitate the numbers and increase the numbers that the private sector is going to deliver. I hope that goes some way to answering your question.
Saskia?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to come back to Councillor Walker's point. So the report's recommendation says to consider and provide views alongside the wider public consultation to help inform preparation. So what exactly will happen to our views here that we are expressing today?
That's a very good point. So at this stage, the options consultation, every response that comes back is then considered by officers and helps to create a draft local plan. So any responses you make now feed directly into that policy making. When we get to the Reg 19, which is when we put the draft local plan out, when we're saying, as the council was saying, this is how we think we're going to do it, we think this is a sound plan, it goes back out to consultation again, but those responses go straight to the planning inspector and not back to the policy makers. So this is your opportunity to make comments that feed into the policy making.
I mean, it may be possible for us as a committee to add our voice to the Constitution by writing as a group into the consultation, if we wanted to. Okay, I think that's an option, is it not? Yeah. Anna.
Thank you so much, Chair. I really loved how you expressed this, Matt, as an opportunity, which I think is fabulous. And I'm sure you're doing this as a team, but I just want to say some really obvious things that would be absolutely marvellous if you're talking about policy and strategy. There's some really easy wins here when we're talking about the context of the climate crisis. So you could, and I recognise that the government may be legislating for this, but things like, obviously we have the policy already for the net zero. You could expand that. You could do it into water preservation as a standard, so all houses have a minimum for that. We had a lovely resident come in and talk about flooding again. Thank you for your time. But there are lots of different techniques to mitigate flooding. Environmental ones are obviously the optimum one. I'm thinking with my Tree Valley hat on, we have a lot of flooding. You're talking about working with landowners and the biodiversity there. When we're talking about arable land and farming, and in our area, close proximity to that, there is some really good partnerships that can be done. And my own little bugbear in our valley is around tree felling. Now, it's for a separate conversation around enforcement, but we are trying to plant more trees. I think there should be some more teeth if people fell those trees. why are we trying to plant them? And then when people do chop them down against our regulation, they're not being enforced upon. So I think, I'm sure you're doing all this stuff, but I think if we can just keep singing from the same hymn sheet, I think these are some really easy wins in the context of the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis.
Chair, yes, you raised some interesting points. The thing about planning policy is we can't contradict the MPPF, and if we go too far, when we get to the end of the process, which is with the planning inspector at the public inquiry, the developers wheel out barristers and say that our policies are unreasonable or unsound. So we always have to take a measured response. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but we have to take a measured response. So we'll push as hard as we can. So, for instance, we're trialling 20% biodiversity net gain, so we're testing that now as part of the consultation. We've got retrofit first. We're looking for more proof about resilience to the climate emergency. But developers will always come back and say we're being unreasonable and unsound. So we need evidence that our policies are reasonable and are sound. So I think if you've got the opportunity to feed in evidence bases, and again, you know, on the flooding side of things, if you've got some evidence you'd like to feed in, now's the time to feed that in, and officers will respond. I don't know if you want to.
I guess I'm just a bit nervous that where I grew up, we had a lot of housing estates that were built in the 80s or 90s, and they didn't do that kind of walking, the car was king. Yeah. And I don't know whether we can legislate for that, because you go back to the older estates and everyone's got footpaths. And I know that we have an action plan around active travel, but can we legislate for that? Or is, again, are you saying that that's nuanced with government?
Well, I think there's a thing about the wording. We don't legislate. we create policies that developers have to adhere to. But yes, I mean, we talk about a site being porous, so you can get in and out on foot or on bicycles as well as cars. Do you want to add anything to?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, yes, the policy framework will be very much looking at encouraging and requiring, in fact, development forms that, as Matt has said, are permeable and really do maximise those opportunities for active travel. We also have a really good opportunity through allocating some strategic sites for growth to really set out some very clear requirements and almost, in effect, a master plan for those sites in order to encourage, again, the use of active travel. Just also to add to Matt's comments as well around climate resilience, flood risk management solutions, we are looking to make sure that we do integrate those policy approaches so that, for example, you know, sustainable urban drainage systems, that they not only mitigate flood risk, but that they also create the right environment for nature recovery and biodiversity net gain. So it's making those join-ups, which we will do through the local plan, but again, obviously, we will require developers to make those connections as well when they submit planning applications.
Okay. Ruth and then me.
Thank you for that. I'm interested in the engagement with stakeholders, and as you say, this is an opportunity, having to go back and look at the options again is an opportunity to try and reach people that maybe you didn't reach first time round. And I understand, yeah, that you are involved working with seldom heard groups, networks, and in particular younger people and people who currently don't have their own home, who are renting or would like to at least rent. So I was just, can you give us any examples of those groups that you are currently working with? Because I think engagement, yeah, it's so key, especially for something like this, which has, you know, such long-term, potentially very long-term consequences.
I can't specifically yet, because we haven't had the first of the feedbacks. I mean, I mentioned the Housing Assembly, which Curo are doing, and have shared some of their findings so far. But I think, you know, we've had some updates on figures, but this was last week. We'd had 20-odd thousand hits on social media, and we had 2,000 unique visits to the website, that sort of thing. But we haven't had any group data feedback yet. I can only tell you who's lobbied me, and I've been summoned to meetings. So, Ageing Well Baines, I went to a meeting of theirs, and we talked about accessibility in terms of if we're building houses that people can live in for the entirety of their life, then they need to be adaptable downstairs. I think Access Bath said to me, you know, you're only one diagnosis away from needing a wheelchair. So if that were to happen, would you be able to stay in your house, or would you be forced to move, or would you be forced to spend a huge amount of money building extensions and things like that? So those are the sorts of questions that are being fed in from different groups. But in terms of young people, I've spoken to, obviously, the Student Community Partnership, but we're waiting to see. I haven't had any response or an analysis yet of who's been responding in terms of organisations. Is that what you were after?
Yeah, yes, thank you. So I was just wondering, have you been, contacting schools, secondary schools, perhaps particularly, but also primary, to try and get the teachers, I suppose, initially, and then the students interested to get their views? Because they'll be the ones living longer, won't they?
Do you want to?
Yeah, so we're taking a roadshow out across a number of locations across the district, and that deliberately includes locations where we can engage better with younger people. So that includes the university campuses. It does include schools. We've also got a sort of project taking place which Regeneration colleagues are leading on, and that again is taking the local plan and sort of strategy questions around it to students, to pupils, to get their views in terms of, you know, where development might take place and what development might look like, you know, how they think their places should change over the next 20 years. So we are very much engaging with school children, university students, but also young professionals, as well as specific groups like young parents and toddler groups in certain parts of the district. So we are trying to engage really quite widely.
Yeah, and I was, if I can add one more, sorry, if I can add more, I mean, I was lobbied yesterday, Housing Mission Delivery Board, by both universities to say, you know, you have these two talent factories turning out really talented young people. Arts graduates are more likely to set up their own businesses. The fact is that they're not doing it in Bath. They're leaving Bath because there is no housing. So when we look at the, say, the economic evidence for the west of England, we can see that South Gloss is very productive in productivity per resident. Bristol's not too bad. We are absolutely flatlined. We, Bath and North East Somerset, are holding back the west of England because we simply don't, and it's a housing-led problem. So we have got to build the houses if we want to boost our economy, because we need those young people to stay in the area and start their businesses in the area and employ more local people. Sorry.
Okay, so I'd like to ask a question now.
Yeah, very quickly, I was just going to say that the council has taken a very, very different approach to engagement for this local plan, and it seems to be going down pretty well. So we're only a couple of weeks in. We've got, it's a 6-week consultation period. So I've been out and I've met and, had the privilege of talking with people in villages and in our market towns. And, okay, let's just be honest, there are some people that aren't best pleased with what the government is asking us to do, but they are very, very appreciative of us going out and talking and us going out and just saying, this is how it is, this is what we're doing. And I think for me, that's been a really powerful and really important part of the job.
Okay, I'm next, and then you're after me, and then if nobody else wants a question, we'll go to Saskia, and then we'll go to John. Okay, so I've heard what you said, Matt, about the fact there's no housing in Bath, and that's holding us back. And yet, when the government increased the housing numbers, they suggested that there should be 14,000 houses in Bath and 13,000 houses in North East Somerset. And yet the local plan only has 7,000 in Bath and 21,000 in North East Somerset, which seems slightly contrary to what the government is suggesting. And also, you made a similar point about employment. the employment opportunities in Bath are far greater than they are elsewhere in North East Somerset. The plan seems to encourage more employment in Bath and yet not build houses in Bath. So it seems to me that this goes against the whole purpose of our climate emergency, which is what the scrutiny panel is about. So how can we possibly build houses in North East Somerset if we assume that they're going to be employed in Bath? That will create more congestion on our roads, even assuming more of them will be cycling and walking.
And I have raised exactly that point with the Lord's Minister, Baroness Taylor of Stevenage, to say, you know, you're applying this clunky calculator without any sense of finesse. And Bath has, unique in the country, has this ring that is part of the UNESCO World Heritage listing that we simply cannot build on. And because if we build on it, we're immediately informed that we're harming the World Heritage listing. Now, I know there's been some calls for Bath to give up its World Heritage listing from outside of Bath, but there's no appetite for that politically and within Bath, so that's a non-starter. So what we need is a different approach from Heritage England, and so I've spoken with Heritage England, I've spoken with the new chair. We're looking for something new and a different way of doing it, because we've got to solve the problem of the fact that you can't expand the city of Bath if we want the city of Bath to thrive. Otherwise, you know, the part of the reason for bringing in the ban on HMOs of C3, the 2-3 bedroom, banning conversion of 2-3 bedroom family homes, is because they are the affordable family homes in the city, and we cannot replace them. You know, all the new of the housing that's coming forward in Bath, none of it's houses, it's all apartments to maximise, because we want, we're maximising the density. So we just simply cannot replace homes that are lost. So we've been to government. We've argued our case with government and said Bath is unique and you need to take a different approach rather than applying this calculator. And we need a different way of doing affordable houses in Bath. And the government's response has been, we want you to, well, take your arguments to the planning inspector at the end of the process, make your case, argue it with the planning inspector, and hopefully they'll agree. But the problem is if they don't agree, if we make the arguments and they don't agree, they throw out the local plan and we've got another 2 years with no 5-year land supply. And obviously that's the crucial bit. Without a 5-year land supply, we're basically saying developers can stick the houses wherever they want. And we'd be lucky to get 7,000 in Bath if that happens, and they'll all go in North East Somerset without any kind of planning for where they're going to go. So we have to put a local plan together. We've got to put in place a 5-year land supply to cover the next 18 years as part of that. But you are right, the waiting is unfair. But the government doesn't see us as Bath and North East Somerset. It sees us as Bath and North East Somerset. It sees us as one authority area, and their solution is for one authority area, regardless of the really quite valid points you make.
The problem with that argument is that if you have one set of planning rules for Bath and one set of planning rules for North East Somerset, it seems to me very unfair that and wrong, frankly, that an extra 14,000 houses should be put in North East Somerset when the government says that we don't need them there. And it's all, if it was a level playing field and everybody had the same planning laws across Bath and North East Somerset, then I would agree with you that we should be treating Bath and North East Somerset as a single entity. But because the planning rules in Bath are so much stricter, it seems to me very unfair that North East Somerset should bear the brunt of housing that they don't really need, and all the things that I said about the climate emergency.
Can I hand over?
Yes. So I suppose the rules apply equally across all of... No, they do apply equally, but the conditions are different. So whether you're an area of outstanding natural beauty, or whether it's greenbelt, or whether it's an area that has a UNESCO status, that has to be considered but the blanket rules do apply, and then there are additional considerations. And I completely appreciate
I think they're just weasel
that
words.
frustrates a lot of people.
I mean, the rules don't apply equally. The conditions are different, so the rules are different. You can't argue along that line. And that makes no sense.
The rules are...
The rules do apply, but the conditions are different.
Okay, well, I'm not going to talk anymore because there are other people who want to speak. So we go to, I can't remember who we go to now. I think it's Saskia. Go on.
Thank you, Chair. This is connected to the point you're making. Given the ongoing lack of funding for rural public transport and the expectation that local bus services will be withdrawn from April, how can the Council continue to claim that the current local plan options are viable or sustainable for rural communities? With the scale of mass housing proposed in the Summer Valley, the loss of public transport will only force more private car use, putting even greater pressure on rural lanes and minor roads and the climate emergency. If residents and future occupants are left without access to essential transport links, these developments risk deepening rural isolation and undermining sustainability altogether. But what concrete steps will the Council take to address these transport and infrastructure challenges before progressing with the local plan?
Yes, that is a...
I'm going to have to rule that one out because I don't think Matt's responsible for transport. And that question is essentially about transport.
Well, I can
Have a go, Matt, if you want to.
I can make a statement where it does cross over. So the Department for Transport's connectivity calculator is obviously national evidence, and clearly where you are on a well-sustained bus route, your connectivity score is high. But where, say, the worst connectivity scores we have are in Bishop. Oops. The worst connectivity scores we have on our options document are F. So they're not the worst on the calculator, but they're the worst on our maps, and that's Bishop Sutton. So the question then is, if we put forward, or if housing gets built in Bishop Sutton, does that actually make Bishop Sutton more attractive for the bus companies to run a bus in and out? So we can argue that point, and we'll be arguing that point with WECA, that they need to be talking about that. What I said before about, say, for instance, the Soma Valley being a regionally significant area for growth means that's WECA's view, and WECA are the Transport Authority. So if they're going to put their money where their mouth is, then they are going to have to invest in infrastructure. And as you mentioned, so a lot of the roads to the north of Midsummer Norton, where you go into my ward in Bath Avon South, those are single-lane country roads. So we're going to have to improve that infrastructure if we're going to get buses running along them, for instance. But if WECA are going to be trusted, which hopefully they can be, we get a new mayor, different attitude, then we are saying that when you look at particularly the Soma Valley, that actually the infrastructure's got to come first. And it is the infrastructure that unlocks the housing, not the other way around. So we're still going to have some significant challenges. We can look, say, at Bridlington, and if he's going to say we're going to have to negotiate with Somerset to keep. So if Bridlington's going to get 2,000 houses, and it's all currently ongoing, we've got to ensure that there's some sort of bus facility in that new build. There's got to be some sort of green heart to the community that you can get a bus round the whole community and head back to Bath. So we've got to build in that infrastructure. So that's where the local plan can help, is we get that local knowledge that says, we need a bus. We have a bit of a bus, this is 768 in Bridlington, that wanders through some of our villages, but we need some of that still in Section 106 money, so we don't just design in bus facilities, we get the still in Section 106 whereby we can make some improvements to the existing infrastructure, as well as get WECA to invest in infrastructure. But you're absolutely right, we've got to ensure we try and get an infrastructure first approach. And that's why we're focusing on the A4 corridor and Soma Valley, because WECA has said they're regionally significant, and therefore government money should follow that. Do you want to add anything?
Okay, we have 8 minutes left. John?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the 5-year land supply. So we are expected to hold a 5-year land supply, and we don't at the moment, and we are penalised if we don't. How does the local plan reset address that, and when do we expect that we will be back within 5?
That's a technical question which I might pass over to Richard.
Thank you, Matt. So that work is ongoing, John. So in terms of looking at the sites we might allocate for development from the options that we're currently consulting on, the next stage will be then to look at an effective delivery trajectory for those sites to ensure that we will have a 5-year land supply when we adopt the local plan. Adoption of the local plan isn't likely to be until 2027, so until that point in time, to be honest, we are more vulnerable to speculative applications. But what I should also say is that any sites that are granted planning permission, that those houses also count towards your 5-year land supply. So, in effect, by granting some of those speculative applications permission, that also helps to address 5-year land supply in the short term until we can get that, under control, if you like, through a planned approach through the local plan.
So, could it might just be worth mentioning the 5-year land supply. This isn't land that Richard and I sit down over lunch and go, here, 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 here. That's great. So the rules, obviously, so land is privately owned, it's not nationally owned. So it has to be available, it has to be suitable, and it has to be deliverable. So we open up a conversation with citizens, with people and people that own land, and say, tell us if your land is deliverable and available and suitable, etc. And then we make that decision. So I just think that's worth bearing in mind, that it's not us saying it will be there, it'll be there. There has to be a two-way conversation going on with people that own land.
Presumably that land has to have been through the local plan system before you can say that, or can you just?
That's part of the suitability issue. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Karen.
So, I don't disapprove of the local plan. I think it's a great idea. What is really good back on what Louise said, it is evidence-based. It's not just picking out a field. It is residents putting those fields forward. And I understand that you have to look at it and then disregard some of them because they're not suitable, and having the infrastructure in place. So that was my reason for deferring this, to allow people, our residents, to have a say about their own local areas. They know them best, what is going to work for them. It makes a stronger case with planning policy. It makes a stronger case then for when we've got planning applications that goes in, you've got the policy in place to support that planning application. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
I would say that please take the opportunity to feed in your views as well, whether you want to do it as the committee or whether you want to do it individually, because now is the time as well.
I don't appear to have any more questions. So just going back to the point you just made, I think one way we could do that is to put our minutes from this meeting, where all the points that we have made collectively, into the local plan consultation. We can do that, I assume. This is one way that we don't lose what we have said. So we then come back to the issue of, I'm not too sure now what the issue is. Karen, can you explain, are you saying we should carry on now discussing this? Or
no, I'm saying take this back to a later meeting. Once the consultation is finished, we can look at the consultation, we can then add value to that as a representative for our residents.
Yeah, well, I think we could do that, can we not? That's fine. Yeah, we should. So what you're effectively saying is add it to the work plan going forward.
If everybody's happy with that? Yep.
Everybody's seen, nobody's scowling at me, so I think they are. Yes, we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I would just really say, it's local knowledge that we're after, so please encourage your residents to feed in that local knowledge over the next 14th of November is when it closes. As I say, we are on a very compressed timescale, so that evidence will be considered straight away from the word go. Officers will be working on that and pulling together the draft local plan, which we hopefully will be out in June next year. That will be out for consultation. That's obviously got to go through a sign-off process, but it'll be out for consultation hopefully in June. But as I said, the responses to the consultation, the Reg 9, the draft local plan, those responses go to the planning inspector and not back into the council. So now is the time to speak to the policymakers. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming, all of you. There's one final question from Saskia. You slipped one in there.
No, not a question, just a question about Councillor Walker's proposal. When exactly will it come back to this panel? Can we clarify that?
Well, obviously, as we didn't know about it until about half an hour ago, that question's a bit difficult to answer, but we will work with officers and cabinet members to get to it as soon as we can.
I guess, yeah, can we clarify that it will come back before any report is signed off by council?
Yeah.
That is...
Are you meeting in January?
Absolutely sensible, yeah.
January would be very helpful, Chair.
Okay, well, January is not often a very helpful month, but I'm glad it is in this case. Okay, fine. We will put it on the January agenda. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Yeah, that's fine. Do you want to change positions? Are you happy where you are, or do you want to move, stretch your legs? Okay. Right, well welcome to Joel and friends who are going to talk to us about the movement strategy. And I know you've got some slides, and I did say keep it brief because we always like to ask lots of tricky questions. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to come back to the committee. Yeah, it's quite an exciting piece of work, I think, the movement strategy, and it's setting out what we think is, we're calling a decade of change around our transport network. And I'm assuming, assuming that the panel have read the slides and the report already and have had a little bit of a look on the website, and so are familiar with some of the documents. So what I was going to suggest we do today is skip through the slides fairly quickly, so that it frees up time for discussion. With me today is Sam Taylor, who's a key part of delivering the work, along with Jacob, Newbury and Carly and the transport strategy team. There's a huge amount of work that's gone to get us to this point. In terms of then thinking about transport, that accounts for 36% of our carbon emissions, so is a key focus of our journey to net zero. And this strategy really identifies what should be the key foundation for the work that we'll then be doing for the next 10 years on focusing around those traffic carbon emissions. It sits aside alongside the Creating Sustainable Communities strategy that we'd signed off previously, which to a degree is the equivalent of this for the rest of North East Somerset, and this piece of work is particularly focused around the movements in Bath. The movement strategy proposes some key interventions to enable us to shift away from car dependency by improving the choices and the quality of the choices that are available. The strategy will hopefully reduce transport emissions and congestion, and it will enhance the quality of our life and improve the places and our travel choices. So, as I said, we're describing it as setting out a decade of change. Doing nothing really is not an option. If we do nothing, we know forgetting about the local plan, which we need to factor into this, but without the local plan, we still know that the increase in daily trips is going to rise by at least 7% over the next 10 years. And so unless we address this and kind of find new solutions, we're going to be condemning the City of Bath to kind of congestion and people stuck in queues. So we've kicked off the consultation. The consultation runs through to the end of November. So what I was planning to do is to very quickly take you with almost a one line for each of the slides through the slide deck to kind of point out some key features. So if we, yeah, we're getting there.
It's just loading, sorry.
The first 2 or 3 slides in that deck just set out the agenda. The slide 3, which we're nearly there. That one, yeah. That kind of really is focusing on the strategies about rebalancing the streets in Bath and trying to refocus to make sure that we've got the right balance and that we're creating quality places, improved travel choices and reduced vehicle movements. The next slide talks about why we need a movement strategy. Bath is a popular, attractive place and we want to protect and enhance Bath. Traffic congestion is a major challenge. We know that we've got 294,000 daily trips through Bath. And with the projections on growth, that we could see that grow as another 40% of daily trips, which clearly includes trips within Bath, trips through Bath, and trips coming in and out of Bath. So there's when you look at the detailed papers and whatnot, you'll get the analysis of how those trips are all kind of worked through. And we know already that Bath is one of the most congested cities in the UK. I think the survey that we quote says that it's the 5th most congested city. And we know from WECA modelling that congestion costs money. And the estimate at the moment in the West of England combined authorities, it's costing us about £300 million worth of lost productivity through that congestion. So the next slide talks about some of the issues that we're trying to address in the strategy. So in particular, road safety, air quality, noise, greenhouse gases, improved facilities for walking, wheeling and cycling, high quality alternatives to car trips, and reduced congestion to kind of bake in more reliable public transport offers. The next slide on sets out kind of really why the movement strategy is good for both business and tourism and our heritage. And then slide 7 sets out kind of in a little bit more detail. We've used that mantra of great places, better choices and reduced congestion, but there's a little bit more detail in there about talking about improved air quality, improved places, trying to reduce the vehicle intrusion into our heritage areas, which is really important, improved health and well-being, trying to encourage more economically active growth by not allowing transport to be kind of an impediment to that, and having more reliable journeys. The following slide on sets out that we do have a diverse population and that we have to recognise in the strategy that we need to cater for everyone. And while some people want more choices, other people are dependent on certain trips for their car. And so it's about trying to balance the network so that we're catering for everybody in a better way. The next slide sets out the phases of work that we're going through and kind of almost sets out really why now is a good time to have come to the panel. So the first 3 phases of work were really quite technical, and we worked with Atkins Realis to help do the technical work to bring this forward in the documentation you've seen. So you've got a very strong evidence base of where we are at the moment. You've got a good, strong reflection on what works elsewhere. So you've got a whole bunch of case studies of kind of what we know from the technical information and from this thing called I've lost the phrase, but the WECA carbon...
Decarbonisation Playbook Toolkit.
The WECA Decarbonisation Playbook Toolkit, and you've got in one of the appendixes some details about that and how that works, which kind of tells us really what interventions are most likely to give us our ambition and our objective. So we've now reached that point where we've got all that technical information, and we've the phase 3 was visualization of how the strategy could look. And so really we're at the point where we want to kind of reflect on that. So that's why we're coming here. That's why we're going out to a public consultation to then really get views on kind of those options. So the next slide on sets out this people and place street users matrix. So we're trying to classify the streets in Bath as either movement places or people places, and there's a continuum of the different categories, so that we're much clearer, and then as we're moving forward, designing our streets with that kind of classification in mind. And then the next slide on sets out the potential levers that we can do to get us there over the next 10 years or so. So we've tried to set out some short-term measures that we think are probably easy to deliver. There's some medium-term measures that will take a little bit longer, or we need investment in more strategy work to kind of get us there, and then some longer-term solutions as well. And one of the challenges, or one of the things that we're kind of asking you and the wider public about is, of those levers, how hard should we be pulling on each of those levers, and what's the appetite of how much we should be using those to kind of get us to that final objective. So we've only just launched the strategy, so you've got, so that slide sets out the measures of success for each of the levers, and you again can see more of that detail both on the slides and in the report. So that for every lever that we're talking about, we've got clarity about how do we know is it working, and then if it's not working, then that provides the opportunity to kind of reflect and think forward. So I'm going to draw this bit to a close and kind of really open it up for questions, really, and comments on what we're presenting to you today.
Pressed 9.5 minutes, so, you know, I said you could have 10 minutes, so brilliant. Okay, so I saw Karen first, and then Saskia.
Okay, so this is why, Chair, I've asked for this. I want to note the report, and thank you, Joel and Sam, for all the hard work you put into it, but to defer it again to later next year, when the consultation movement will revise to reflect the comments made by the public. So it's going to be adopted in 2026. But if you can come back to this panel for us to scrutinise and make any comments then, I think that's the best time to make comment on this report. Thank you.
Yeah, I would. In fact, I spoke. Do you want to answer that? Because we are coming back. We've already agreed we're coming back, and Joel will tell you.
Yeah, I kind of have a bit, and as per the previous conversation, I wonder whether it's worth picking up and feeding in the minutes and notes of the comments now into the consultation, so that gets captured. But then I'd be really keen that we come back and present to the panel the feedback or the themes that we're getting from that consultation before we then move to the final document and strategy. So the timeline for that would probably be spring, was what I wasn't going to be quite as specific as January. So I think probably the reality is that March would be the earliest, but kind of spring next year.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you,
I know there's global warming, but I don't consider January to be spring under any circumstance. Yes, actually, I'll just make a small comment. It's very encouraging to see that these two items are going to be scrutinised very efficiently. So thank you for your contribution, Karen. Saskia.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, looking at the 15 levers, I believe they could be more SMART, so SMART referring to specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time-bound. I think they are pretty vague, to be honest, and I would love for them to be more SMART. So, and then also the movement strategy includes some measures for success, but those are also very vague. So they refer to things like mode share data and journey time data without specifying what the change will look like. So I guess we know that transport is now the largest single area of emissions. So how and what will we be measuring to know how we are doing towards reaching our journey to net zero goals, which are set to be by 2030? So is it possible to have KPIs for each lever and for these to be reported on, please?
Yeah, if I pick that up and maybe hand over to Sam. So I don't know whether you've had a chance to get to Appendix C yet in the documentation. So that sets out in quite some detail the levers and some of the key measures for success around those. But if you feel that they're not, I can see there, that you don't feel that that's strong enough, please put that into the consultations and we can reflect on that. I don't know, Sam, whether you've got anything extra you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a really good fair point around the levers and measurable targets. It's definitely something we can take away. I guess my biggest push is just make sure we're getting that on our website so that we're collecting them all in a formal manner. It really helps us when it comes to looking at all of the feedback we're receiving so far.
And then kind of your final point about then turning those into KPIs, I think that's a really useful point. My sense is that we need to do some more work on sort of the broader transport KPIs, and so this definitely needs to feed into that. Yeah.
Okay, very good questions. Anna. Oh, sorry. John, then Anna, yeah, and then Saskia.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about our intentions with regard to traffic in the city centre. So in the past, we've said we wanted to eliminate non-essential traffic from the centre, and the current local plan refers to, and I quote, a city centre that is free of all but essential traffic, and a largely traffic-free centre by 2029. And it seems in this movement strategy, we're just satisfied with reducing its intrusion into the centre. And I'm asking really, are we sort of rolling back in terms of our ambition to make the city centre essentially free of all but non-essential traffic?
I think that's a good question, and I don't think we are rolling back at all. I think it is quite complex to achieve that ambition, and so we're trying to set out some key pieces of work around that to kind of make that possible. And there are some things which are sort of not quite in our gift at the moment, so the challenges around Cleveland Bridge are quite key to our strategic network, and so we've kind of provided some documentation around that. But the ambition to kind of be really clear on what our through routes are, and to have the through traffic staying on those through routes, and protecting our historic centre, and protecting areas for tourism, and trying to look at kind of things like the freight movement piece to kind of get freight vehicles out of places like the city centre are all key parts of that. But it is complex, and so this is setting out kind of the plan to try and deliver that ambition over the 10 years.
Right, but I think I just would like to put to the record we're not rolling back on our ambition as before.
Not at all.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, Anna, then Saskia, then Karen.
Thank you, Chair. So the first teeny tiny thing is a point of order. In your report 2.13, you said only 62% are satisfied with the bus reliability and punctuality in Bath and North East Somerset. Most of the authority is run by WECA. So I guess that's just, it would be better to have that in two pieces, because actually Bath might be super reliable and WECA unreliable. So that's just a point. The second thing was some residents brought this up, and it's so localised and tribal, you're probably all going to hate it in the room. But I'm going to float it to you. So people get quite annoyed at the whole rural versus Bath view, and part of that is transport. And I know you guys have done some great work around the park and ride, etc. And Joel, I know I've floated some pretty crazy ideas at you, so I'm going to do another one now. Under the MI permit, or whatever it's called, me permit, I don't know how you pronounce it, you could, my permit, I'm dyslexic, it says me to me, you could do a discount, even a token discount, for certain postcodes in the region for parking in certain car parks. So you could pick the car parks that you think are appropriate, so it's not congesting the city, let's say. A lot of complaints with my residents is the price of the parking. But obviously we don't have a bus to Bath. So, yeah, you could say Charlotte Street has 20% discount for a BS postcode, for example. I'm sure you're all going to disagree with that, aren't you? Yeah, so that's just my feedback from some door knocking this month.
I think that's a really interesting idea. Certainly one of the big pieces, or one of the levers that we've talked about, is a parking strategy, and so I think that would be a really helpful point to feed into that piece of work that when we bring that forward. Thinking about how we create the right incentives and disincentives around parking, and so trying to protect our car parking space for the people that most need it, and to try and provide better alternatives to needing to drive your car into the city centre for those who don't need to do that is quite key to our success around that. So that's definitely worth feeding in.
Surely the lever on the park and rides addresses this issue very well, I think. I believe those plans are really good. They're in place and they look good, and I think they would address exactly this issue without offering discounts in city centre car parks.
I think that also is an interesting point as well, Saskia, and you're absolutely right that another one of the key levers is the issue about the park and rides and getting that balance right. But yeah, so I think both points are valid, and it highlights almost the challenge of kind of balancing sort of conflicting issues to get this, trying to get this fine line of getting the balance right.
Sorry, Chair, this was not the point I was going to make. Going back to the movement strategy. So the promised vehicle circulation plan, I believe, is missing from this movement strategy. There's obviously an interactive map with layers, but to me it is not showing where traffic will go or where active travel and public transport will be prioritised, or not in enough detail. So, for example, it does not show which of the 3 roads leading to Claverton Down will be the main road for motorised traffic and which one will be the main route for active travel. So I believe we are missing some detail there that we have been promised for a very long time now, and I think we desperately need.
That's useful as well. I think we've tried to provide that visioning of what the future could look like with some maps. If you think there are some missing bits, so that particular point, then please flag that up and say we need to clarify where those are. The team have done, I think, quite a bit of that detailed work, but if there are missing bits, we need to pick that up and kind of work on that.
Thank you, Chair. So you mentioned HGVs on major routes, and I think I've raised this in this panel before Andy was Chair, about coach companies dropping their passengers off at the park and ride so they can then get the park and ride bus down into the city centre, so to alleviate some of those heavy vehicles using our roads. So I think I've raised that before. And I wanted just to touch on congestion. We talked about more electric cars, more bikes. I just spoke to somebody just recently, who'd just been to Amsterdam, got off the tram, and the amount of bikes was just unbelievable. So it's about managing that as well. So I just wanted to raise that.
Yeah, I think both of those are really important. One of the key levers we've talked about is the coach strategy, particularly because of the unique nature of our city, that's a key element that we have to deliver. So that's, I think, one of the levers that we've talked about doing sooner rather than later, and trying to get that right. And then you're then thinking about the active travel network. Again, we've talked about that we've got the great piece of work that we'd already signed off on the active travel master plan, and the next step of that is trying to prioritise that and making sure that we've got the right infrastructure to deliver the needs that will kind of deliver for now and for the future, so that it doesn't feel that it feels like it's managed, and you've got the good separation of wheeling and cycling from pedestrians, and that the pedestrians also feel like they're enabled because they've got good quality pavements and walkways and the rest of it.
John?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about phase 1, the evidence-led approach. Because we're talking here about categorising streets on aspiration, on the role that we want them to play in the vision, which might well be very different from the role that they play at the moment. but we're looking at the categorisation based on existing data sources and experiences. So I don't see how existing data sources and experiences talks about the aspiration other than it talks clearly about the role of the street at the moment. So, for example, if you look at the A4 west of Cleveland Bridge, so the Parapon, for example, going in towards Queen Square, at the moment, current data would see that as a movement street. Clearly, in the vision, we want that to be a place street. So I'm unclear how we're doing this classification on vision if our primary input is current data.
I'll maybe get Sam to pick this up a little bit more as well, but my understanding is we did a bit of both. So we did a bit of kind of making sure that the data was right about the current movements, and then there was a reflection of, well, if we want to achieve those ambitions, then how do we need to move it? So I think on that, the maps that are set out, that you'll see that there's kind of a focus away from the key route going through the historic part of Bath. But there was quite a bit of data work that the team did, which probably Sam can help me with on that.
I'm going to be honest, it was slightly before my time when I joined the council, so it was my colleague who previously worked in the team that did that initial work piece. But yes, you're completely right. They looked through the data, they identified where those roads were currently, but maybe there's that missing piece that just looks at that future vision. We did try to look at that as well, but this has been more of looking at the levers and how this, there needs to be kind of like that element of additional work maybe done on what that map could look like with each of those different matrixy pieces. Does that help? Probably.
Do we at any stage get to see the categorisation down at a street-by-street level? So I can, for example, go into that and say, OK, this is how the A4 west of the bridge has been classified?
I think that's one we can take away. If we can get that feedback, again, through the consultations, it's been very much like that data piece that we've done of current movements and kind of what that future vision could look like. But I think that's a really fair point, and we can definitely do something like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Alex.
Yeah, I've just got a question and one point I'd like to make. So on the alignment with wider opportunities, where we're talking about the A350, what discussions are we having with Wiltshire Council in order to coordinate that with our movement strategy? Because obviously that will impact Wiltshire, because all traffic flows and this kind of thing. Also, as someone who does like to cycle into Bath from Keynsham and outer areas, it would be nice to see some consideration done on the path after you've came off the Bristol to Bath, along the river there, because that basically single access a lot of the time. You're right next to the river. It's quite dangerous. You've got a few bridges where you literally got to give way. And I think that we could do with definitely doing something along there, because a few times that's stopped me from travelling into Bath by bike. And then I end up driving in, which then causes issues in Bath with traffic. So I think those are two things I'd like to see done, really. Thank you.
I think both of those points start to stray into Lucy's portfolio. But I think they're both valid points. I think the whole M4 to South Coast corridor work, that's a long piece of work that should support this and should support that strategic shift of through traffic actually not coming through Bath whatsoever and going that other route. But that's a long piece of work that Lucy will be able to give you the detail on and update you on specifically. The other piece then about the Bath-Bristol cycle path, again, that kind of sort of moves into the territory of the CRSTS pieces of work in the Bath-Bristol A4 corridor piece, which, again, we're just out to consultation, but I think that specifically is dealing with the point that you're raising in particular and that link and trying to get that link fixed. So I think they're both useful points, and maybe we should capture that minute and get Lucy to maybe come back to you with some more detail on that.
I have better news than that. We actually have Lucy coming to the November meeting to discuss the CRSTS, so we can ask questions of her at that meeting. So good question, and hopefully it will be addressed in November. Saskia.
Thank you, Chair. I believe school streets are missing from the movement strategy, even though they are known to be a very effective method to reduce short journeys by car and create safer and healthier places for children and other people. So technical appendix C about the levers does not mention school travel plans or school streets at all. When I did the consultation, there was a reference to school streets in lever 15, but then in the lever itself, there's only a mention to school travel plans. And I guess I wanted to raise my concerns about travel plans as a concept. They're obviously a great concept, but I guess in practice, I don't always see the results of them. So I guess just mentioning school travel plans, I think, is too weak, and we should really mention school streets and have a school strategy in place.
I think that's a good point. I think lever 15, I thought, talked about school streets, but we'll look at that again and take that away in more detail. And certainly in our mind, that focus on safety and kind of particularly getting young people to education is really important. And that whole pressure of the school run and giving people better choices is really important. So really helpful point. And again, amplify that in the response back if you think that we've not kind of made that point strong enough in the documentation.
It's definitely lever 15, so you're there. John, is it John? I think it's John.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question now about city centre parking. So the aim, I assume, is for people who are coming in towards the city to park at the interchange hubs and then take transport, shuttle buses and so forth to come in. So we are trying to discourage people driving into the centre and parking in the centre. Now, at the moment, a lot of the city centre parking is dual use. It's the on-street parking, rather, is dual use. It is for residents with permits, but it's also metered for people who are driving in. I think in the city centre at the moment, the majority of on-street parking spaces are dual use in that way. So are we intending to take away the metering, so they're purely permit holder parking on street?
So it's a good question. I don't think we've got to the answer yet, but the view is that having a parking strategy, the parking strategy piece will deal with that. I think the feeling from the advice is that at the moment that we incentivise because of the combination of our pricing and whatever and the alternatives, we incentivise car journeys into the city centre, and if we're serious about this piece of work, we need to be giving people better alternatives and kind of disincentivising unnecessary car movements, but we've got to balance that with kind of, I've got kind of Paul Roper's kind of voice in my ear, kind of almost saying, well, you've got to make sure that you're making this work for business as well, and that there needs to be an easy way for if accountant for said business wants to pop in and have a 15-minute chat with the business and then pop out again, that the travel choices are appropriate and work for them as well, and make it easy for them to do that, but to try and do that in a way which is less car dependent and less parking dependent is what we're aiming for. So we'll come back with more detail on the parking strategy when we get to that piece in the programme.
Karen?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on the parking strategy. What we don't want to do is stop our residents that do live in rural areas, because Bath is a really, truly beautiful city, and there's parts of Bath people don't get to see because of parking restrictions in certain areas. So I just really wanted to make sure that we don't alienate other people that want to see our beautiful city.
Yeah, I think we all share that ambition. Keep it keen again that we capture that in the feedback in the consultation.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just looking at the map of where the hubs currently are and proposed hubs. So those are basically the park and ride sites, aren't they? Yeah. So I don't know if this sort of covers it, but I think it's great that we want to encourage commercial lorries and so on to avoid the centre. However, I was just thinking, is there any possibility for large lorries to arrive at these hubs or other hubs possibly, and then kind of decant, where possible, into smaller vans so that we don't have to have, or very, very few large lorries in our city at all, only smaller ones. So on the outskirts of Bath, it could be possibly where the hubs already are, or if not, are there other, is there a scheme to address that?
Yeah, so you're right, the interchanges are the existing park and rides, but we've also got the suggestion that we look at the university site as well and think about the key movements for that key site of employment and students, and think whether we can do that better. In terms of the freight piece, that's lever 11, and so we've got some good examples in the work around. That's a key piece of work to bring forward as part of this broader piece of work, and we've got examples, I think, set out in Bristol of where they have made that work better, and so we need to build on that evidence of where it is working elsewhere and have these, I think, the freight consolidation points, and whether then you use bikes, cargo bikes, or whether you use little vans to consolidate the freight movements to kind of try and get unnecessary vehicle movement of lots of vans coming into the city centre is key. So that's a key piece of work that we'll need to bring forward in that programme.
Okay. Last question, John.
Thank you. I have a question on reclassifying roads, which to my mind is quite a useful tool. Now, on page 34, the strategy says the movement strategy is not proposing to make changes to the classifications of any of the primary roads. And it would seem to me that if we are recategorising roads from movement streets to place streets, then the ability to recategorise them, or reclassify them from being A roads to no longer being A roads, would seem to me quite a powerful tool. And I wonder, is there any reason why the strategy is saying that we're not going to be reclassifying any roads?
I'll get Sam maybe to pick that up, but I think there's an element of, well, we've set out all those levers and saying how hard do you want us to pull on the levers. Maybe that's one of the examples of you saying we should pull on these levers a bit harder, and so we should pick that up. And if you've got specific places in mind where you think it would be really helpful for us to change the classification, that would be really useful to put in. But let's go to Sam to kind of comment on the specific of that sentence in the report.
It might have just been a slight miswording. What it's essentially saying is things, so at the moment the A36, A46 are classified as a primary road network. They are identified as roads that national highways maintain and manage. And when we say we can't, we're not, the movement strategy isn't reclassifying those types of roads. It's that work piece of who owns which roads, as in we are only looking at the roads that BAMES owns. So we aren't reclassifying, we can reclassify those that have been set within the classifications set in the movement strategy, but we're not able to reclassify roads at national highways versus what roads we own, if that makes sense.
I realise that, but there are many roads within Bath which we do have the ability to reclassify. We're not restricted in that way. And I'm particularly interested in, as I say, the A4 west of Cleveland Bridge. So the strategy talks about having through traffic coming in on the London Road, turning left, going over Cleveland Bridge, so not continuing on the A4. We definitely want to discourage inappropriate traffic heading in, continuing to head in as it does today, and reclassifying that so it's no longer the A4, no longer an A road, would help to encourage the through traffic to turn left and go over Cleveland Bridge and avoid the centre. And that is one that we are able to reclassify. So I do have a very specific street in mind, and will happily write that down and send it in to you.
And I guess so lever, sorry, I've got my little crib sheet, lever 10 is around signage, and so I guess you're kind of saying almost signage is good up to a point, but there may be that we need to go one step further and think about actually reclassifying.
Well, the reclassifying will then feed into sat-navs more than signage will. And a lot of people follow the sat-navs and they won't turn even if you want them to.
Yeah, let's capture that and try and put that in, but that's a helpful point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I thought the questions were excellent, actually. very, very pertinent, and I hope they've helped you, Joel, in your work going forward. I'd like to move on now to the Climate Annual Report, and I'd also like to thank Matt, who has very don't you go yet, Matt, has very kindly sat through it, because if we could make the first questions after your introduction on the 20% biodiversity net gain, because that links to the local plan and also to the climate emergency, sorry, the Climate Annual Report. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Right, so over to you, Sarah.
Okay, I think we're going to have some PowerPoint in a second. Yeah. I can start chatting while that comes up anyway. So I'm going to assume as well that you've read most of the, read the full report which you have in the pack, and it's just a few reminders that we are going through. So you'll remember that we declared a climate emergency as a council in 2019 and an ecological emergency in 2020, and that we published action plans shortly after, and we committed to bringing an annual update on progress against both of those to council. So you're getting a chance to hear about our progress in the last 12 months ahead of the discussions at Cabinet and Council that will take place next month. Of course, the World Meteorological Organization recently reported that we saw a record rise in carbon dioxide last year, and we've seen another year of accelerating weather extremes here in the UK with four heat waves, and the hottest summer on record I saw recently is the projection of what they're going to say, and fierce storms and flooding. And the Committee on Climate Change has advised the government must be prepared to deal with further extremes, so is suggesting 2 degrees of global heating is expected by 2050, and has also made clear that UK preparations for rising temperatures are inadequate. Councils, of course, have a really important role to play in all this, and some of that we do through delivering in our own right, and in other areas we enable and require other members of our community to take action. And then, of course, you've got to remember that all that we're trying to do here, so we have prioritised this, made it absolutely central to our corporate strategy for the last 6 years, but we're doing it in a context of continuing and tightening austerity for local government and of having insufficient powers in various areas. So we're extremely committed, and you'll see, I think, from the report that we are a leading council, but it is a very challenging area. So these pictures you've got up here capture a range of some of our activities. There's lots and lots of positive action that is going on in our district, and these are some of the groups that we are partnering with and that we celebrate and are thrilled is going on. So what you've got up there, for example, tree planting in Pennyquick Park, work towards developing a new food strategy which is ongoing. You've got volunteers improving Chalcombe Community Nature Reserve, and you've got trials of electric waste vehicles and solar panels going in on Bath Leisure Centre. We'll go on to the next slide, which is, so as you may have followed, during the summer we did a residence survey, to which we had 833 responses. What we saw was that residents have noticed that they are experiencing hotter and drier days and seeing fewer insects. One of their strongest motivations is to help nature, and some of their priorities for action are water and rivers, restoring nature, working on the way we travel and the energy that we use. The things that they are already doing themselves are carrying reusing items and planting pollinator-friendly plants and repairing their broken goods. The things they would like to do that they can't do so easily are around retrofitting their homes and installing water-saving measures, with the biggest barrier to action being cost. They have fed back to us that we need to communicate better as a council what we are doing, and we absolutely take that on board. And you may be aware that there's a bit of a revamp going on in terms of communications and engagement across the board, and we'll certainly feed that message into that process. Where they would like to see more action from local government are around improving public transport, which of course is a West of England combined authority responsibility, and we work closely with them on that, on protecting and enhancing our green spaces, and on supporting renewables and energy efficiency. Shall we go on to the next one? So in terms of our progress, we are seeing a steady reduction in emissions. So in the year to 2023, which is what we're reporting on, we saw a further 5% from the previous year, 2022, and we're seeing reductions across domestic, public sector, industry and commercial sector. So in one way, it's encouraging that we're continuing to see a downward trend, a trend that's moving in the right direction. But on the other hand, it's clear that in common, I think, with all local authorities and with the national pathway, we are not on track to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2030. We will be working shortly, well, we are working already, are developing a new climate and nature strategy that will look to break down emissions by sector in more detail. So we'll go on to a bit more detail on some of those sectors. Decarbonisation, yeah. So I just want to say that we are a leading council. So in the west of England, as you can see, you've got lines there for Bristol. Can you go back? Yep. Bristol and Bath are ahead of the national and regional pathway. In Baines, per capita emissions have fallen by 53% since 2005. There is another comparative tracker of action on climate emergency, which looks at actions taken by councils, which is the Climate Emergency UK Climate Action Scorecard, and on that tracker we are the 17th ranked unitary authority, which makes us a leader because we are the top placed small provincial unitary authority, behind only London boroughs and bigger cities, so the bigger cities Glasgow, Bristol and Edinburgh. So I think that demonstrates how much of a leader we are. We're going to go on now to decarbonising buildings. It's one of our biggest challenges, domestic buildings emissions. So it accounts for 32% of the district's emissions in 2023. We have seen a reduction since 2005. A lot of that comes down to grid emissions reductions. And it is a real challenge to get residents to provide them with real alternatives to gas central heating, and the levers that local government has to make this possible are very limited. So we see that in the 2021 census, we see that Bath and North East Somerset properties which only used gas central heating stood at 74%, which was only down by 3% from 77% in 2011. So you see that in 10 years there had been very little change. However, we are seeing an improvement in Bath and North East Somerset homes with an energy performance certificate rating of A to C, which has increased from 29 to 36% in only the 2 years from March 23 to March 25. So we are seeing progress there, and we saw 162 heat pumps installed in domestic buildings during the 2024-25 financial year, many of them with support from Retrofit West, which is the organisation that we and the West of England Combined Authority all support. Right, we'll go on to the next slide. Transport is a massive challenge, in common, I think, with every other local authority. It's harder for us than it is, for example, for a London borough or a big city, because we have both rural and urban residents, as we've already heard in our earlier discussion, and because of the combination of changes that are needed. I think it's absolutely clear that we don't have sufficient support from government on this. We need greater funding and powers over the bus industry, and a very much clearer line of communications from government about the importance for health and for the economy of providing and enabling those who are able to use alternatives to the car to do that. So, of course, the co-benefits of getting more people to use sustainable transport in their daily life include health. So it's a way of building active travel into people's daily routine, so improving both their physical and their mental health, and also improving our air quality. So it's a super important thing to do, not only on carbon emissions grounds. We have seen improvements. I think one area where we can say that Bath and North East Somerset is leading, or demonstrates that we are leading in this area also, is that we have seen a decrease in the number of kilometres travelled by all vehicles of 3% compared to 2016 data, when over the same time period across England, there was a 3% increase. So although the reductions are not sufficient, they are encouraging and show the ways in which we are leading. Let's go on to decarbonising the council operations. So here we see emissions from electricity and gas used in our corporate buildings. So of course, I remind you that council operations are a tiny percentage of the overall district's emissions. So in terms of carbon emissions for the whole district, it makes very little dent, but I think it's important in terms of leadership that we demonstrate that this can be done. So we've seen a decrease in electricity emissions, which again, we've been supported in that by the decarbonisation of the grid. We have seen an increase in electricity consumption, and this is what we expect to see as we move towards an increasing proportion of electric fleet vehicles and the installation of heat pumps in our corporate estate. In terms of fleet, we've seen a net gain of 11 electric vehicles into the fleet and a net loss of 10 diesel vehicles. And over the coming years, we're going to be doing lots of work on this. So at the moment, as I think has been mentioned, we are trialling electric recycling and refuse collection. And those diesels actually are currently responsible for 39% of our remaining fleet emissions. So we did set aside a budget, £14 million in budget setting this year for decarbonisation of the council's own activities. Further. Now we'll go on and talk a little bit about nature. So there you have a measure of the abundance of key species, which is at West of England Combined Authority level, because that's the level at which the data is currently collected. We recognise that the ecological emergency is extremely serious, and we are fully committed to helping reverse that decline. We are looking to track the state of nature through measuring the abundance of key species, which is one of our 3 key priorities in tackling the ecological emergency, so obtaining better measures for the abundance and distribution of key species. We're looking here at total bird records per square kilometre across the old county of Avon, and we are seeing that figures have fallen by 12% since 1994. And of course, there are certain species which specialise, for example, in insects eating, who have fallen by much, much more substantial margins, for example, swifts by 87%. We'll soon have better data through the West of England Wildlife Index, which is work that's going on with the West of England Combined Authority. Go on to the next one. So this is some of the areas where we can evidence our progress over this year on ecological emergency. So in particular, the top item is we are developing new measures for the state of nature through a new wildlife index, and working hand in glove really with the West of England Combined Authority on that, and on quantifying the land managed for nature, which again is one of our key priorities in our ecological emergency action plan. Then another item comes from the local plan, which, so we were early adopters of 10% biodiversity net gain in planning policy when we brought through our local plan partial update nearly 3 years ago now. But the whole rest of the country and the National Planning Policy Framework has now caught up with us, so we're not leading quite so well in that way, but what we are currently consulting on is the possibility of requiring 20% biodiversity net gain, which again would put us back up there in the vanguard of leading councils. We have our own internal green infrastructure delivery programme providing benefits for nature, health and climate resilience, and we've developed a new green infrastructure standards and a revised local plan green infrastructure policy. And we continue to work in partnership with lots of organisations on this. Right, we'll go on to the next one. So this is Bath and North East Somerset, and this is our mapping of where land is being currently managed for nature. So we believe that the areas shown in green on the map we are confident they are being managed for nature, and the areas in yellow may be being managed for nature, and the green areas make up 6% of the district and the yellow areas 14%. And in terms of council-owned land, we estimate currently that 11% of land is managed for nature. And we are committed to increasing the land being managed for nature as part of our ecological emergency action plan. We're being helped by our existing biodiversity net gain planning policy, which requires that if a developer brings in new development, that the biodiversity must finish up in a better state after than it was before. In those instances where there's not space on site to achieve that, we've now got a fund which developers can pay into. So, for example, that is supporting our work with community group at Charlton Meadows. It's a field that was formerly owned by the council and simply rented out for peanuts, I think, for grazing, and is now become a community nature reserve, a 6.5 acre site, and biodiversity is booming there. And then finally, I think that's almost the last one. So this is showing you the West of England area. Last year, our nature recovery manager sitting behind me is led on the development of the West of England local nature recovery strategy, which was the first in the country to be published just 1 year ago. And it sets out priority and focus areas for nature recovery across the region, enabling us to better target our resources and ensure planning decisions take account of opportunities for nature recovery. There is one more final slide. We're enabling more. So another of the planks of our priorities of our ecological emergency action plan is to enable more people to access and engage with nature. We've got lots of nature-based projects. This is just highlighting some of our partnership projects that we have. So this is the way in which we bring this about, because obviously, as we've heard, lots of land is privately owned, and it's difficult for local government organisations to obtain funding. So we work in partnership, and so we've got lots of geographically focused projects running aimed at enhancing biodiversity by working with landowners. So, for example, up there you've got Bathscape and Summer Valley Rediscovered and the Bath River Line. So, finally, just to say, as I've mentioned, we are currently developing our next climate and nature strategy and action plan. So after 5 years of the previous one, it's time for a rethink. So I would encourage you as a panel to have a think about how you would like to engage with that. And another piece of work that is ongoing is development of an adaptation strategy. So again, have a think, and if you've got views about how you as a panel want to engage, welcome those.
Thank you, Sarah. So going back to my previous point, I'm interested, so I'm going to ask the first question, which is really quite rare. I think it may even be unique. So I'm interested in the very encouraging 20% biodiversity net gain from the local plan, and I recognise that it crosses two Cabinet members' portfolios. So my question is very simple, and it's what would it look like? What would a 20% biodiversity net gain on a local plan look like? How will we know it's different?
Well, some of my colleagues behind me will know more about the technical measures, but I mean, essentially, if you're doing a development, an ecologist comes in nowadays and does a measure of the biodiversity score value of what's on site.
Well, before you start?
Yes, before you start.
Right.
So before a new development takes place, an ecological report gives a score as to what the value of the biodiversity on site is, and then you know what you've got to achieve afterwards. And so then, depending on the nature of the site in question, there's all kinds of things you can do around, creating rain gardens, sustainable urban drainage systems, parks, meadows, depending on the nature of the site. And if your site is very constrained and there is no way to do it on site, then as a developer they could choose, and I think you have to agree presumably with planning officers, where an alternative location they would be for improving biodiversity, or pay into the council's fund. Anything you want to add to that, Stuart?
Yes.
Can you put your microphone? No, you can't.
Okay, now I'm on both. I'll pass that back, Sarah. And if they can't achieve that on-site, there are mechanisms by which they can go off-site. We can't force them to go to a certain location. They're free to go to what is effectively the market of biodiversity off-site. So there's off-site sites that have been registered. They can purchase units from one of those sites. We're also looking to use some of our council lands to provide what are called biodiversity units to enable developers to purchase off-site units when they can't deliver it on site. Effectively, what 20% would look like is you'd hope, like Sarah said, that more biodiversity would be provided on site, and if that can't happen, there'd be more biodiversity created, let's say, or enhanced in the rest of the district. So we're seeing more land managed nature across the district.
I think my point is that we've had a lot of building in Keynsham in the last 10 years, and that's only 10%. And quite a lot of that has not been on the site affected where the housing is. I won't go into details. Now, my concern is that when it goes to 20%, then a lot more of those will be away from the site where the housing is being built. And I'd really support the idea of 20% biodiversity, but I am concerned that other parts of the district will become much richer in biodiversity, whereas the areas that were rich are becoming poorer because of the extra housing. That is my concern.
If I can jump in as well, and you know, we've spoken about this before. Generally speaking, wildlife and humans don't mix very well, so it's not just that the land is used up with houses and tarmac, and therefore there's not the land to do the biodiversity. It's actually, if you're going to develop, and we are going to be developing on a lot of green fields, is you need to be able to make an assessment of what that is, which is what we do, a calculator, and then what we're also doing is encouraging some of the smaller parishes to do nature recovery strategies alongside neighbourhood plans, which means that, okay, there's the big site, but around that big site, you have smaller parishes who have nature recovery programmes that need funding, and the development is actually then, okay, so it pushes that recovery a little bit further out. But I share your concern that we're actually creating an industry a bit like carbon offsetting, where it's very difficult to, very difficult to know whether that piece of rainforest you purchased to offset your regular flights, in and out of Europe or whatever, is actually there or not. It's very difficult to. And I would be concerned, I would share your concern if we were creating an industry that's taking money out of our developments and using it to fund schemes that aren't even in the west of England kind of thing. That would be difficult. But also remember, we need to test this. We're going to test the 20% biodiversity net gain because, like it or not, developers come back to me particularly and say, well, look, do you want the 20% diversity net gain? Do you want the EPCA? Do you want the retrofit? Do you want us to do this work on climate resilience? Or do you want the affordable? Is it? Because all that costs money, but you're saying you want the affordable. So we're under pressure, and there is a cost to being out the front, but that's why we're going out to test it, because if there's still lots of support and people understand what biodiversity net gain achieves, and I have to hold my hands up and claim an interest. I have orchards, I'm completely reliant on insects pollinating my apple trees. If they disappear, I'm screwed. So, biodiversity is incredibly important. Again, let's get your views, get people's views into the consultation. And
I think the answer to your question would be to possibly the shareholders of those building companies get slightly less dividend and more goes to the actual building. And I've said a lot, so I'm not going to say anything else. And there's a whole host of people, so I'll just go around the table. So Ruth, Anna, Saskia, John.
Thank you. It was just a follow-up question, just to ask at the moment, because I'm not sure what. Is there, with biodiversity net gain at the 10%, is there a kind of geographical limit to developers purchasing land? Has it got to be within Baines? Has it got to be within the West of England area? Can it be up in the Midlands, Scotland? Or yeah, so that's my question.
So first of all, developers need to follow what's called the mitigation hierarchy. So they need to do as much on-site as possible. Only then can they go off-site. And I think what we're seeing is, in its early days, so let's say we start with 100% biodiversity, we're trying to get to 110%, if that makes sense, 10% gain. About 100% will usually go on-site, and it's the extra 10% that might go off-site in some cases. We're bound by national regulations on this, so they will either need to offset in what's called a national character area, or the local authority area, so Baines. But that does mean that if they're in what's called the Bristol, Avon, Valley Ridges, I think, national character area, they can offset within North Somerset, South Gloucestershire, or most of it, without being penalised. If they're in the Cotswolds, that does mean they can offset anywhere within the Cotswolds, basically, without being penalised. So there is the potential there for units to go elsewhere. What we've done to try and mitigate that is we've been successful in facilitating the establishment of off-site habitat banks within Baines. We do have, thank you, we do have some already set up and a lot in the pipeline, so we're quite confident there will be the units available, if that makes sense, in the district. There's a bit of a communications piece to try and make sure that developers are doing that in district where possible, but we can't force it, unfortunately.
Thank you, Chair. And just to say, because of work schedule, I have to leave after this, so Karen, Saskia, John, nothing against your questions, but I just need to ask my question and go. So really quickly, I just want to say that as a person with neurodiversity, this report was written so lovely and so beautifully done. So to the team, the officers, I read a lot of this stuff, and this is my favourite this year. So thank you so much for the hard work that went around that. Brilliant content. I also want to say, in the highly depressing climate, I guess, political climate we live in now, this was quite a hopeful thing. So I'm really, really proud of the work we've done as a council. I champion it to all the residents. So congratulations. I understand some universities are even studying what we're doing as a lead. So just a big win there. So fabulous. And I want to end on a bit of a negative point, so I'm really sorry about that. But I think the theme that came up time and time again for me is around government. And as a council, we're leading by example, and we're doing fabulous things within our gift. But, I mean, what you just explained just there, Stuart, about this is from legislation from government. I have a village in my ward, Stanton Drew, that has no gas. They all have oil. There is a big win there. If government just changed things around in the sense of subsidies, I think there's something around the price. We have a cost of living crisis. The price of our bills is linked to fossil fuels. It could be linked to renewables. The retrofitting is highly expensive. There could be better schemes there. And I think it is marvellous what you guys are doing within what we have. But the big pushback here, and I'm sad that none of our Labour colleagues are here to listen to me, but there's such easy wins that the government could be doing from a cost point of view, which in your survey was the biggest barrier. So not to end on a negative Nancy, but fabulous work. I think the government could do much, much better. I have to agree with you.
Anyone want to respond to that, or should we just bathe in our glory? Okay, I'll move on to Saskia then.
Just a quick note in response that air source heat pumps can be really, really cheap if you have a modest house. I can talk to me if you want to know more. They're fabulous. So thank you for the report. I would love to see more data and predictions in this report, if possible. I find it hard to find the KPIs again. and especially with regard to transport. So we obviously have that target of reduction of 25% in car mileage, and I guess a 3% reduction has been mentioned. So how does that look like then in terms of our prediction until 2030? That doesn't look good, I believe. So I guess I'm asking for more data, please, and how, especially with transport, how can we as elected representatives and as residents understand how we are doing in terms of reaching our journey for net zero goals? I find it very hard to get my head around it based on this report.
I refer you, I think, to the corporate performance report, which is, there are areas, I think, in which we are still working on developing the right measures, the right performance indicators, but some of those indicators are in that report, and I think there's another version coming soon. Does one of the officers want to add any more technical detail?
Yes, hello. The pathways that you're speaking about, Saskia, to 2030 are ones that we are doing a specific piece of work on at the moment. So we are bringing together a transition plan, which will bring together the different elements from transport through to energy, buildings and so on, to create that year by year or multi-year by year, multi-year transition plan. And that isn't a requirement necessarily on us as a council. However, there is good practice from other cities, indeed some of those that are scoring very well in the Climate Action Scorecard. So Bristol, Glasgow, for example, recently, all Scottish local authorities are doing a similar process, and we are just working through how we can apply the same model to us in both North East Somerset. So the forward trajectory against which we're working will become clearer in the next few months, I hope.
Thank you, Chair. It's lovely that we are doing so much to reduce our own emissions as a council, and we've put ourselves into a leadership position, because that leadership position then allows us leverage. And you make the point that the council's own emissions are something like 1% of the emissions for the whole region. So I really like to see how we are leveraging our position, the learning that we've acquired, the achievements we've made, leveraging those with the other large organisations that produce so many emissions. So whether it's the universities, whether it's Wessex Water, whether it's any of the large sources of employment and sources of emissions, I think we need to be focusing on how we influence them, leveraging our position to get more from them over the next 10 years.
Thanks, John. So we have what we call a Future Ambition Board, which brings together some of the major employers and other important organisations around the district, and that's got an overarching group that looks at all areas, I think, of the economy, but then there's a climate emergency subgroup of that. So the chair of that is, in fact, I think I don't know her title exactly, but she's the local leader of Bura Happold, Claire Smith. So we are working closely with lots of those, so that universities are represented on that board, as are some voluntary groups. I'm trying to think whether someone might remind me whether Wessex Water are on there. I think they are. Okay, there we go. So we are working with them, but you are right that probably the thing that some of the residents picked up in the survey is that there's probably more that we could be doing to communicate the really good work that we're doing in this area to the public, and that's something that we need to be working on, I think, in the coming months, because what's clear, I think, from the report is that we are in a position of leadership, but I think that the residents don't necessarily know about that. So we need to work out how we can get that message across to them and help kind of inspire. Yes, I think you're right. Perhaps putting out case studies and things of the good things that we are doing on our estate we could be doing more of that. I don't know. Does anybody want to add more?
All I was going to add, and hopefully you've received invites, is on the 18th of November we've got a Climate and Nature Network Forum here in the Guildhall, which is bringing together our anchor institutions as well as a number of other partners, and we've got both looking at the climate and the nature element of that.
Climate change is a systemic problem, so we need to be looking at, not just what individual people can do, but how we influence and move, the larger parts of the system.
Yes, absolutely, John. And in the full pack, it wasn't in the overheads from today, but in the full pack, of course, you'll remember there's that onion diagram, the diagram with the different spheres of influence, and we recognise absolutely that as a council we're in a unique position and we can make planning policy, and we can change the layout of our road network and provide transport infrastructure, and those are systemic changes that we can make that steer people to different choices, that enable them to take different choices that they might not otherwise have chosen to do. So we absolutely recognise that there's a difference between us and as an organisation and and individuals in their homes, and probably compared to private business, although they will have other spheres in which they can influence either their customers or their staff. So yes, I agree with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Did you say last question?
It's the last question, yeah.
So you referred to a new climate and nature strategy and action plans, which is very good news. I think it was promised for 2025. So I just wanted to clarify when this draft will be coming to this panel, which I guess is a question to the Chair as well. So will we get to discuss it before it's being approved by Cabinet?
Oh, we could do that. If you'd like to be involved in a sort of policy development discussion around it, maybe we can programme that in.
Yeah, stick it on the work plan. I'm sorry, I forgot Karen. Apologies.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted just to pick up on the passenger journeys in Bains taking place on local buses. I would like to see that WECA buses, we have longer contracts with them, not 12-month ones, so that people know that there's going to be a regular bus service going forward. And also infrastructure, and again, I'm going to raise this here, is infrastructure on A367 at the junction with Radstock and Peas Down to have that roundabout so that buses can move more freely at that junction. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. In terms of the in terms of bus contracts, I absolutely agree with you, and that's one of the things that we are currently discussing with the West of England Combined Authority, and will be lobbying government around. It's absolutely vital in order to embed successfully new bus services that money can be committed to them over multiple numbers of years, so that they can get through the sort of period when people are still discovering that they exist and kind of establish themselves. Because in our privatised bus industry, they really, on the whole, they have to make money, because the amount of money that local government has to subsidise the few services that are supported is reducing all the time. So yes, absolutely vital, and we are lobbying on that account with you. And I agree about the importance of infrastructure, and it sounds like Lucy will be coming to talk to you soon about the A367.
Sarah, do you know when would be an appropriate time for that to come back?
We're just putting in place the planning for the transition plan I just spoke about, so somewhere late spring would be ideal if possible.
Late spring.
It depends on the elements that the panel would like to be part of developing, so I guess we can come from...
Okay, we'll pencil you in May. Is that fine? You happy with that? Good. Okay. Thank you. Can I just add to Anna's comments about the quality of the report? Because when I see a report that's over 100 pages, you will be surprised to learn that I'm not jumping for joy about that. But it was an easy read, and it was well laid out, and it made it clear, particularly the statistics. And I thought there were a lot of statistics in your report. Always, I'd love to see more, but I thought it was an excellent read. I mean, it's as Anna said, it's a pleasure to see something that is going in the way we'd like it to go, whereas we're not fighting fires, we're actually perhaps, building for the future, and that's obviously what we should be doing. So thank you very much for the report.
Can I just add a huge thank you to the officers who've done such a brilliant job in putting it all together, and as you say, there was a huge amount of data and a huge amount of checking involved.
Actually, I was thanking the officers. We need to move on before Sarah comes and says something unpleasant to me. We need to move on to the panel future work plan. Now, I think we've actually had 3 that we've added already in this meeting, which we have noted, and it is in the plan. Does anyone have any more? Saskia.
Something that has already been brought up today, but the flood risk management and climate adaptation.
Yeah, well, we did have that in March, but...
Well, that was very different, I believe. That was about rivers.
It was about rivers,
not necessarily flood mitigation in the
Okay,
region.
yeah, that's fine. I'm very happy, as the rivers advocate, I'm very happy to do that. Thank you. Anything from anybody else? Saskia?
Something that I would love to see coming to this panel, which I'm not sure when, but active travel master plan prioritization. So there is an active travel master plan, but the next step would be prioritization of the routes.
Yeah.
So if you could discuss that.
Well, I think that's in-house, isn't it? It's coming, one hopes, because that is an inevitable consequence of where we are. If we're going to actually make any difference, we're going to have some sort of plan, aren't we? So hopefully it's coming anyway, but it's in the minutes. We will raise it in the minutes. Unusually, the minutes will go to 2 consultations, the relevant bits of the minutes, not all of it, obviously. So that's quite an interesting development as well, so thank you for that. And on that note, apologies for the fact that it's 12:14, so I've gone 14 minutes over. I don't know who to blame, but I'm sure I can blame somebody. So thank you very much for your attendance.